On a winter morning in 1914, more than 400 men and women gathered in the grand halls of the Battle Creek Sanitarium in Michigan. They had come from across America, eugenicists, scientists, judges, educators, all summoned to discuss a proposition that would chill the blood of any modern listener. They called it the First National Conference on Race Betterment, and at its center stood a man in an immaculate white suit, a white cockatoo perched on his shoulder, preaching a gospel of genetic purity that would inspire some of the darkest chapters of the 20th century. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, inventor of cornflakes, pioneer of wellness culture, America's most famous health guru, stood before that assembly and declared that 15 million sterilizations would be necessary to save the nation from genetic degradation. Children paraded across a stage, judged like livestock for their superior heredity, while parents beamed with pride. The newspapers called it a celebration of perfection. History would call it something far more sinister. But this was merely one face of the empire built within these Italian Renaissance walls. Behind the marble facades and gleaming hydrotherapy equipment, patients submitted to treatments that defied reason. 15-quart enemas that flooded their bodies, electrical currents jolted through their eyeballs, vibrating chairs that shook them into digestive submission, medical procedures on children performed without pain relief in the name of moral purity, all orchestrated by a physician who believed he alone understood the path to human perfection. The sanitarium transformed American breakfast tables forever, tearing apart two brothers in a bitter rivalry over cereal and fortune. It promoted pseudoscience disguised as medicine, championed theories of racial superiority that would later fuel genocide, and built an empire on the promise of salvation through science, only to watch it all crumble into receivership and ruin. What remains today is a federal office building, silent and bureaucratic, stripped of its former character. The treatment rooms are gone, the exotic equipment dismantled, the grand dining halls where patients once sang the chewing song in synchronized rhythm have been subdivided into cubicles. But the ghosts remain, the memory of what happened here, the treatments administered, the lives altered, the dangerous ideologies spread from these very halls to institutions across America. This is the story of how a temple of health became a laboratory of control, how cornflakes were born from theories about dampening human passion, how a family fortune built on fizzy brown soda funded a vision of racial purity, and how the pursuit of perfection led not to paradise, but to suffering, scandal, and eventual collapse. If you enjoy uncovering the darker histories hidden behind grand estates, you're welcome to subscribe and explore more with me. Battle Creek Sanitarium rose like a palace. It fell like an empire, and the darkness at its heart would take decades to fully understand. The Western Health Reform Institute opened its doors in 1866, conceived by James and Ellen White, founders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Their vision was modest, a small facility promoting temperance, vegetarianism, and exercise, principles they believed divinely inspired. Ellen White had experienced visions, she claimed, revealing God's design for human health. In an era when doctors prescribed whiskey for ailments and administered mercury as medicine, the Whites' emphasis on clean living seemed almost revolutionary. Battle Creek, Michigan, became the unlikely headquarters of this new religious movement and its accompanying health crusade. The town was unremarkable, a cluster of homes and shops surrounded by cornfields, but it would soon become synonymous with a peculiar brand of American wellness culture. Enter John Harvey Kellogg, born in 1852 to a devout Adventist family. His parents, convinced of Christ's imminent return, saw little reason to invest in their children's secular education. Yet young John Harvey possessed an intellect that could not be contained. The Whites recognized his potential early and sponsored his medical education, grooming him as their chosen instrument to spread Adventist health principles. By 1876, at merely 24 years old, Kellogg assumed control of the Western Health Reform Institute. He immediately set about transforming it, beginning with the name itself. Dissatisfied with the institution's humble designation, he appropriated the word sanatorium, then used for facilities treating wounded soldiers, altered two letters, and christened his domain the Battle Creek Sanitarium. It was a linguistic innovation that would enter the American vocabulary, and it signaled Kellogg's ambitions. This would be no mere health retreat. This would be a temple of biologic living, a fortress against the forces of moral and physical decay he saw consuming America. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg cut an unmistakable figure as he strode through the sanitarium's corridors. Immaculate white suit, white shoes, often with a white cockatoo perched upon his shoulder like some bizarre oracle. His appearance was theatrical, carefully cultivated to project an image of purity and authority. Behind the showmanship lay a mind both brilliant and fanatical, driven by an unshakable belief that he alone understood the path to human perfection. Biologic living, Kellogg's self-coined philosophy, went far beyond simple dietary restrictions. It was a complete reimagining of human existence, rooted in the Adventist health principles the whites had promoted, but expanded into territory they never imagined. Kellogg prohibited meat, alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, tea, and condiments of any kind. Salt, pepper, mustard, vinegar, all were classified as dangerous. Stimulants that excited the system and led to moral corruption. Even eggs and dairy were to be consumed sparingly, if at all. But diet was merely the foundation. Kellogg believed that modern civilization had weakened humanity, that Americans had become soft, diseased, and morally compromised. The solution required total control: what patients ate, how they exercised, when they bathed, even how many times they chewed each bite of food. He was a devoted disciple of Horace Fletcher, a dubious health guru who advocated chewing each mouthful at least 40 times before swallowing. At mealtimes, Kellogg would lead his patients in singing the Chewing Song, a rousing anthem with lyrics commanding, "Chew, chew, chew, that is the thing to do." The sanitarium dining room became a theater of the absurd, where wealthy industrialists and socialites sat together, masticating their bland grain dishes in synchronized rhythm, counting each jaw movement as Kellogg had instructed. Conversation was discouraged. The focus was to be entirely on the mechanical act of breaking down food into its most digestible form. Kellogg's obsession with digestion bordered on the pathological. He subscribed wholeheartedly to the now discredited theory of auto-intoxication, the belief that undigested food in the intestines produced poisons that seeped into the bloodstream, causing everything from headaches to insanity. The solution, in his view, was constant vigilance over the bowels. He declared that more people need washing out than any other remedy, and designed an entire suite of treatments to achieve internal cleanliness. The Battle Creek Sanitarium boasted 46 different types of baths, a statistic Kellogg promoted with evident pride. There were foot baths and sponge baths, conventional enough. But then came the continuous bath, in which patients were submerged in water for hours, days, even weeks at a time, permitted to emerge only for toilet breaks. Kellogg prescribed this treatment for skin diseases, chronic diarrhea, and various mental afflictions, including delirium, hysteria, and mania. One can only imagine the psychological torment of being confined to a bathtub for days on end, skin pruned and wrinkled, while Dr. Kellogg assured you that your madness was being slowly drowned away. Hydrotherapy reached its apex, or nadir, with the enema machines. Standard enemas of the era might involve a pint or two of liquid. Kellogg's custom-designed apparatus could pump 15 quarts of water per minute directly into a patient's colon. 15 quarts. Nearly 4 gallons of water surging into the human intestine, again and again, in pursuit of that elusive state of internal purity. He advocated yogurt enemas as well, believing the bacterial cultures would establish beneficial flora in the gut. Whether patients found this practice enlightening or humiliating, the historical record diplomatically declines to say. But Kellogg was not content with water alone. He experimented extensively with electricity, convinced it possessed therapeutic properties that medicine had barely begun to explore. Using a device he cobbled together from telephone parts, he administered what he called sinusoidal current treatments, mild electrical shocks applied directly to the skin. He claimed these treatments were painless and could cure lead poisoning, tuberculosis, obesity, and when applied directly to the eyeballs, various vision disorders. Picture patients sitting perfectly still while the doctor in white approached with electrodes, preparing to send electrical current through their corneas in the name of improved sight. His electric light bath was equally bizarre. A wooden cabinet lined with light bulbs in which patients would sit or lie, baking under the intense heat and illumination. Kellogg promoted light therapy as a cure for diabetes, insomnia, gangrene, syphilis, and even writer's cramp. The actual therapeutic value ranged from minimal to non-existent, but the spectacle was undeniable. Then there was the vibrating chair, a wooden seat that shook it up to 60 times per second, supposedly stimulating the bowels and improving circulation. Patients would sit, teeth chattering, organs jostling, while Kellogg observed with satisfaction. He invented beating machines and slapping machines as well, giving patients the choice between being mechanically pounded or flogged to stimulate circulation. The sanitarium resembled less a medical facility and more a strange carnival of the body, where flesh was subjected to every conceivable form of agitation in pursuit of health. President Calvin Coolidge kept one of Kellogg's mechanical horses in the White House. The Titanic's first-class gymnasium reportedly housed another. The wealthy and powerful found something appealing in these contraptions, perhaps the illusion that health could be achieved through passive mechanical intervention, that one need not actually change one's habits, merely submit to the right machinery. But no aspect of Kellogg's philosophy was more disturbing than his crusade against what he termed the solitary vice and the vile practice. He devoted enormous energy to this topic, writing extensively about it in his best-selling book, Plain Facts for Old and Young, which he completed in just 14 days at age 25. The 356-page tome went through multiple editions and sold 500,000 copies, revealing just how receptive American society was to his message of fear. Kellogg claimed that such behavior led to poor digestion, memory loss, impaired vision, heart disease, epilepsy, tuberculosis, insanity, and a host of other maladies. He saw it as the root of physical and moral decay, a gateway to complete degeneracy. His recommended preventive measures ranged from psychological conditioning to medical interventions that would be considered deeply unethical today. For young people, he advocated restrictive devices, dietary restrictions, and, in cases he deemed severe, medical procedures performed without anesthetic relief, believing that discomfort would provide a salutary effect upon the mind. For young women, his recommendations included the application of caustic chemical substances to sensitive areas, and in extreme cases, surgical interventions. These were not idle suggestions buried in obscure texts. These were published recommendations from one of America's most respected physicians, advice that influenced parents and educators across the nation. The bitter irony is that Kellogg practiced what he preached. His marriage to Ella Eaton in 1879 was reportedly never consummated. The couple lived together for 41 years in complete celibacy, both believing that physical intimacy would drain their vital powers and compromise their health. During their 6-week honeymoon, Kellogg spent much of the time revising his book on intimate life, a grimly appropriate activity for a man who viewed physical connection as a threat to be managed rather than an expression of love. They never produced biological children, but raised 42 foster and adopted children, including 7 African Americans, 4 Mexicans, and 1 Puerto Rican, a diverse household unusual for the era. Kellogg believed that proper environment could overcome poor heredity, that nurture would triumph over nature. The experiment did not entirely succeed. Some children thrived, others, including George, the son of a woman from a deeply troubled background in Chicago, became sources of disappointment, drifting through Battle Creek and occasionally creating public difficulties for the doctor. This philosophy of purity through denial extended to food as well. Kellogg believed that bland food would dampen passions, that spicy or well-seasoned dishes excited not just the palate, but also stirred inappropriate desires. Meat was particularly suspect. Kellogg was convinced that flesh-eating inflamed the system and led directly to a moral corruption. His invention of cornflakes was thus not merely a nutritional innovation, but a moral intervention, a breakfast so bland, so utterly devoid of sensory pleasure, that it would keep America's youth on the path of righteousness. The account of how cornflakes came to be is one of the few genuinely positive chapters in the Battle Creek Sanitarium saga, though it would ultimately tear the Kellogg family apart. John Harvey, his wife Ella, and his younger brother Will Keith, known simply as WK, began experimenting with grain-based foods in the sanitarium kitchens during the 1890s. Patients complained constantly about the monotonous vegetarian diet, and the Kellogg's sought to create foods that were both nutritious and palatable, or at least marginally more appealing than the usual fare. The breakthrough came by accident in 1894. The exact circumstances remain disputed. Family members offered conflicting accounts. But the generally accepted version involves John Harvey being called away one night, leaving a batch of wheatberry dough behind. Rather than discarding the stale dough the following day, he ran it through rollers and was surprised to produce delicate flakes that could be baked. Granos, the world's first flaked cereal, was born. The product proved unexpectedly popular with patients who began ordering it by mail after leaving the sanitarium. By 1895, over 100,000 pounds of Granos had been sold. Encouraged by this success, the Kellogg's continued experimenting. In 1898, they developed a flaked corn cereal, Corn Flakes, though the early versions had a short shelf life. Here the brothers' relationship began to fracture. John Harvey saw cereal as a means to spread his message of biologic living, a tool for reforming American eating habits. Profit was secondary to mission. WK, 8 years younger and temperamentally opposite to his flamboyant brother, saw untapped commercial potential. He had spent 25 years serving as John Harvey's subordinate, managing the sanitarium's business operations, running alongside his brother's bicycle to take dictation, even following him into bathrooms to record his thoughts. The relationship was one of servitude and humiliation. WK also observed how competitors were flooding into the cereal market and making fortunes. C.W. Post, a former sanitarium patient, had launched Grape Nuts and Postum, earning $3 million annually by 1900s. More than 40 cereal companies emerged in Battle Creek alone during the early 1900s, all attempting to capitalize on the health food craze. WK realized that his brother's reluctance to embrace aggressive marketing was costing them an empire. In 1905, after a quarter-century of subordination, WK made his move. He offered to buy the cereal business from John Harvey, who was in debt and largely uninterested in the commercial side. The elder brother agreed, and in 1906, WK founded the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company. What followed was a marketing revolution. WK understood that success required not just a good product, but aggressive promotion. He launched a campaign telling readers to wink at your grocer and see what you get, the answer being a free sample of Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Sales in New York City increased 15-fold. He poured millions into advertising, creating some of the first cartoon mascots and using every available medium to build brand recognition. But there was one critical element WK insisted upon that John Harvey despised: sugar. WK began adding sugar to his cornflakes, making them far more palatable to the general public. To John Harvey, this was heresy, a complete betrayal of the product's purpose. The point of bland cereal was to dampen passions and promote health. Adding sugar transformed it into precisely the kind of stimulating food he had spent his career warning against. The final betrayal, in John Harvey's eyes, was WK's use of the Kellogg name. Every box bore the signature WK Kellogg in large, swooping red cursive. John Harvey watched his younger brother build a commercial empire, using their family name while, in his view, corrupting the product's original purpose. John Harvey retaliated by forming his own Kellogg Toasted Cornflake Company in 1908, selling a competing version. The brothers went to war in the courts, a legal battle that stretched from 1910 through 1921. In 1911, WK won the right to exclusive use of the Kellogg name in the United States. When John Harvey tried to launch a sterilized brand cereal in 1916, WK immediately created his own version, Brand Flakes, and took his brother back to court. This time, WK crushed him decisively. The judge not only dismissed John Harvey's complaints, but ordered him to pay WK all profits earned from cereal sales over the previous 10 years. The Michigan Supreme Court unanimously upheld the decision. The victory was total, but it brought WK no peace. A lifetime of feeling beaten down had twisted him into a bitter, paranoid man. His marriages collapsed. 2 of his sons severed contact with him. Even his own grandson would later describe WK's death in 1915 as a relief. The brothers never reconciled. When they met in later years, WK insisted on having a third party present. Near the end of John Harvey's life, he wrote an emotional letter to his younger brother, a clear attempt at reconciliation, full of regret. But his secretary, not wanting her employer to appear weak, never sent it. WK finally received the letter in 1948, years after John Harvey's death. By then, WK was blind from glaucoma. The letter had to be read aloud to him. Witnesses reported tears and silent stoicism. The words came too late to heal wounds that had festered for 4 decades. While WK was building a cereal empire, John Harvey turned his attention to what he considered an even more important mission: the improvement of the human race through eugenics. The eugenics movement had emerged in the 1880s, inspired by Francis Galton's theories about heredity and selective breeding. The core idea was seductive in its simplicity. If humans could breed superior livestock and crops, why not apply the same principles to our own species? Identify the best specimens, the intelligent, the healthy, the morally upright, and encourage their reproduction. Simultaneously prevent the unfit from passing on their inferior traits. Kellogg embraced eugenics with the same zealous intensity he brought to digestive health. As early as 1881, he was calling for legislation to prevent individuals deemed alcoholic, criminal, insane, or feeble-minded from having children. In 1886, he declared that the intellectual inferiority of the Negro male is universally acknowledged, reflecting the virulent racism embedded in eugenic thought. In 1906, he founded the American Medical Missionary Board, which he renamed the Race Betterment Foundation in 1914. The foundation sponsored medical missionary conferences, health initiatives, and charitable giving, but its most significant contribution to American culture was deeply sinister. It became a leading promoter of eugenic ideology. Kellogg organized 3 national conferences on race betterment in 1914, 1915, and 1928. That brought together hundreds of eugenicists, scientists, politicians, judges, and social leaders. The first and third conferences were held at the Battle Creek Sanitarium itself, transforming the health resort into a gathering place for those who believed human worth could be measured, categorized, and controlled. To make eugenics appealing to the public, Kellogg organized mental and physical perfection contests where children and babies underwent tests and evaluations, with winners receiving medals for their superior heredity. Parents proudly displayed their genetically favored offspring, while conference attendees took notes on breeding strategies. The event schedules were published in newspapers, and thousands attended, treating the conferences as entertaining spectacles rather than the dangerous pseudoscience they represented. At the 1914 conference, Harry Laughlin delivered a presentation titled Calculations on the Working Out of a Proposed Program of Sterilization. He claimed that 15 million sterilizations would be necessary to save America from genetic degradation, arguing that the lowest 10% of the population was so poorly endowed that their reproduction constituted a social menace. Laughlin outlined specific strategies for implementing mass sterilization programs, criticizing existing regulations as too weak. Kellogg amplified these messages in his own writings. In a paper titled Needed a New Human Race, he encouraged all citizens to become involved in eugenics. He promoted both positive eugenics, encouraging people with desirable traits to have large families, and negative eugenics, preventing the unfit from reproducing. His influence extended into education. Colleges in Michigan began offering or requiring eugenics courses. Battle Creek College, located near the sanitarium, defined race betterment through eugenics as the institution's primary mission. All students and staff were expected to support and promote these ideas. Michigan had been the first state to propose eugenic sterilization in 1897, though the law didn't pass until 1923. That legislation, upheld multiple times in court, led to 3,786 officially documented forced sterilizations in Michigan alone. 76% targeted individuals deemed mentally deficient, 11% those considered insane, and the remainder so-called inappropriate individuals, people with epilepsy or moral degenerates. African Americans and poor people bore the brunt of these interventions. The movement reached its apex in 1924 with the Supreme Court case Buck versus Bell. Carrie Buss, portrayed as a member of a feeble-minded family who had given birth out of wedlock, became the test case for Virginia's sterilization law. Nearly all evidence presented was false, and her defense made no real effort to challenge the charges. Both sides wanted the law upheld. The Supreme Court ruled 8-1 in favor of forced sterilization. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote the majority opinion, infamously declaring that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Following this decision, many states enacted or strengthened eugenic sterilization laws. By January 1935, over 21,500 forced sterilizations had occurred nationwide. 33 states eventually had such statutes, leading to more than 60,000 involuntary sterilizations. Kellogg remained committed to eugenics even as the movement's association with Nazi Germany caused most Americans to abandon it. Madison Grant, a prominent American eugenicist, received a letter from Adolf Hitler proclaiming Grant's book, The Passing of the Great Race, to be his Bible. When Americans realized their theories had helped inspire the Holocaust, support for eugenics collapsed. But not for Kellogg. In his 1928 address to the Third Race Betterment Conference, the 76-year-old doctor proclaimed that eugenics race hygiene as suggested by Galton and euthenics individual hygiene must be made a religion, or rather a supplement to all other religions. Just weeks before his passing in 1943, he wrote that race betterment was the only hope there is for saving the human race. The supreme irony is that despite his racist ideology, Kellogg actively supported African American advancement in certain contexts. He refused to segregate patients or students at the sanitarium by race, highly unusual for the era. 67 African American physicians and nurses graduated from sanitarium-associated schools before 1917, and many remained as employees. He supported Adventist missions to African Americans in the South and raised black foster children in his home alongside white children. This contradiction, genuine personal kindness toward individuals coupled with support for systemic theories of racial inferiority, exemplifies the moral incoherence at the heart of the eugenic movement. Kellogg could treat individual African Americans with respect while simultaneously promoting theories that classified their entire race as genetically inferior. He never reconciled these positions, never acknowledged the fundamental injustice of his beliefs. While ideology and cereal wars consumed the Kellogg brothers, the physical sanitarium underwent its own dramatic transformations. The original wooden structure, built in 1878, had gone through major expansions in 1884 and 1891 as Kellogg's reputation grew and wealthy patients flooded to Battle Creek. The facility became increasingly luxurious, less reminiscent of a hospital and more akin to a grand resort hotel. Kellogg's vision had always been to create not just a treatment center, but a destination. A place where the rich and influential would come not only to restore their health, but to learn the principles of biologic living and spread those principles throughout American society. But on February 18, 1902, disaster struck. An early morning fire began in the sanitarium, pharmacy, and swept through the campus with terrifying speed, completely destroying the main building, the charity hospital, and several smaller structures. One man perished when he ran back into a burning building to retrieve his life savings. Flames lit up the Michigan night sky, visible for miles across the prairie, as decades of Kellogg's work seemed to vanish into smoke. John Harvey Kellogg was traveling on the West Coast when a reporter informed him of the catastrophe. Most people would have been devastated. Kellogg spent the rest of his journey sketching plans for a new, even grander facility. The fire, in his mind, was not a tragedy, but an opportunity. He moved quickly. A cornerstone was laid on May 12, 1902, amid great fanfare. The completed facility opened its doors on May 31, 1903, barely 15 months after the fire. The grand opening became a major event, with special excursion trains bringing visitors from around the world. The platform at the building's entrance was festooned with flags and bunting. Speeches from dignitaries competed with music from John Philip Sousa and W.C. Handy. Kellogg delivered the keynote address, and ample police protection ensured order as thousands toured the new marvel. The rebuilt sanitarium was a masterpiece of Italian Renaissance revival architecture, a 5-story stone structure that dominated the Battle Creek skyline. It faced Washington Avenue with an imposing facade that announced both permanence and prestige. Inside, the facility featured the latest in heating and ventilation systems, spacious treatment rooms, luxurious patient quarters, and enough capacity to handle hundreds of guests simultaneously. But the new building came at an enormous financial cost. The structures that burned had been insured for less than half their value. The reconstruction went significantly over budget. Kellogg had hoped to finance the project through sales of his book, The Living Temple, with all Adventists encouraged to sell copies to the public. But church leaders rejected the book as heretical, leaving him scrambling for funds. Most of the financing came from Kellogg's own lecture fees, medical and surgical fees, book royalties, the sanitarium food business, grateful former patients, and the Battle Creek community. The sanitarium flourished through the 1910s and 1920s. At its peak during the summer season, it housed 700 patients and employed nearly 1,000 staff members. The facility sprawled across 30 acres, encompassing more than 30 buildings. It included a hospital with research facilities, a nursing school, farms providing fresh produce, a canning plant, and the Sanitarium Food Company manufacturing Kellogg's various grain products. In 1928, at the height of post-World War I American prosperity, Kellogg oversaw the construction of one final addition, the Towers, a 15-story Art Deco skyscraper at the corner of Champion Street. With 265 guest rooms, a luxurious lobby, and elegant dining facilities, the towers represented the sanitarium's absolute zenith. From its upper floors, guests could gaze across the Michigan landscape and feel themselves at the pinnacle of modern wellness culture. The timing could not have been worse. The stock market crashed in October 1929, barely a year after the towers opened. The Great Depression devastated America's wealthy class, precisely the clientele the sanitarium depended upon. Previously well-to-do patients who had thought nothing of spending weeks at Battle Creek suddenly found themselves struggling to maintain their businesses and homes. The flow of guests slowed to a trickle. By 1933, the sanitarium was forced into receivership by the Federal District Court. Dr. Charles Stewart, who had assumed titular leadership as Kellogg aged, was named receiver. The institution limped along for the next several years, struggling to fill even a fraction of its capacity. The towers, built to showcase prosperity, became a monument to miscalculation. Kellogg, now in his 80s, had lost much of his control over the institution. The towers had been built against his wishes by board members, convinced that bigger was better. Increasingly, he turned his attention to other projects, including the Miami Battle Creek Sanitarium in Florida, which opened in 1930. In 1932, he confided to a friend that it was a pleasure once more to be in a place where I can get everything done as I wish to have it done. In 1938, the receivership was terminated and a new board of directors appointed, including Kellogg. But the other board members agreed he should not regain his former dominant influence. The restriction infuriated him, and he attempted a takeover that failed. His empire was slipping from his grasp. The final blow came in 1942. The United States, now fully engaged in World War II, desperately needed medical facilities to treat wounded soldiers. The federal government purchased the sanitarium building for $2.25 million, a fraction of what it had cost to build and maintain. The Battle Creek Sanitarium became the Percy Jones Army Hospital, named after a young officer who had died in a training accident. Thousands of soldiers passed through Percy Jones during World War II and the Korean War that followed. Among them were future Senate Majority Leader Robert Dole, who spent months recovering from devastating injuries, Senator Daniel Inouye, who lost an arm fighting in Italy, and Senator Philip Hart, All three would later lend their names to the federal center that occupies the buildings today. The hospital closed in 1935 after the Korean War ended. In 1954, the complex was converted into federal office space. Today it is known as the Hart-Dole Inouye Federal Center, a bureaucratic facility housing government workers, utterly stripped of its former character. The marble floors remain, as do the basic structures, but the hydrotherapy equipment is long gone, the treatment rooms converted to offices, the grand dining halls subdivided into cubicles. Tourists occasionally visit, curious about the site's history, but most Battle Creek residents drive past it without a second thought. John Harvey Kellogg continued working at a punishing pace even as the sanitarium crumbled around him. He had never learned to rest. "I love to work and to work hard," he once wrote, and he meant it. Biographers noted that he seemed able to tap almost superhuman sources of energy, often working 40 hours without break. His method was a dictation. He would lie on his front porch wrapped in blankets during winter, speaking at 180 to 200 words per minute, while a freezing secretary recorded every word. He felt most energized between 3 hours and 4 hours in the morning, and thought nothing of starting dictation just before midnight and continuing until dawn. "I am under no obligation to practice what I preached," he declared on his 60th birthday. "My business is to preach, and really, I haven't time to practice. I am putting out fires. That is my business. I belong to the fire department, and I haven't time to look after my own health." The intensity took its toll. "My head and spine have been giving me great inconvenience and often acute suffering," he wrote after 10 years of medical practice. "I reel and tremble and get blind and have so many nervous symptoms I am ashamed to tell them all. Worst of all, my mind seems to stop sometimes, and I cannot force it to go." But he never truly slowed down. At 91, he was still dictating for 16-hour stretches. In spring 1943, he was involved in negotiations over what remained of the sanitarium. His sight, hearing, and sense of taste were rapidly deteriorating. In late fall, he developed Bell's palsy, causing the left side of his face to droop. The vain doctor, always conscious of appearance, began secluding himself in his Battle Creek residence, unwilling to be seen in such a diminished state. On December 11, 1943, shortly after a conversation with his adopted son, Richard, Kellogg developed acute bronchitis and pneumonia. Severe coughing and shortness of breath racked his frail body. 2 days later, he felt remarkably better and had to be physically restrained by his doctor from attending appointments. That evening, he slipped into a coma. He never regained consciousness. John Harvey Kellogg died on December 14, 1943, half an hour before midnight. He was 91 years old, an extraordinary lifespan for the era, perhaps lending credence to some elements of his health philosophy, though his final years were marked by the very infirmities he had spent his life trying to prevent. The next morning, his body was transferred to a funeral home, embalmed and dressed in his signature white suit, shirt, tie, socks, and shoes. His mahogany, silk-lined coffin was placed atop a flower-bedecked platform in the sanitarium auditorium, surrounded by an honor guard of nurses. Admirers filed past, each receiving a printed document containing condolences from hundreds of prominent people worldwide. The funeral service was ecumenical. Reverend Carlton Brooks Miller of Battle Creek's First Congregational Church delivered the eulogy. Prayers were offered by Elder E.L. Pingenot of the Battle Creek Tabernacle, the Seventh-day Adventist church that had disfellowshipped Kellogg in 1907, and Reverend Henry Jordan, the sanitarium chaplain. Despite their theological disputes, the Adventist community could not entirely disown their most famous son. Kellogg was laid to rest in Oak Hill Cemetery in Battle Creek, beside his wife Ella, who had died of colon cancer in 1920. His plot was located not far from the graves of James and Ellen White, the couple who had first sponsored his education and launched his career. Also nearby lay Sojourner Truth, the former enslaved person and abolitionist who had been a sanitarium patient, and C.W. Post, the rival cereal magnate. 8 years later, W.K. Kellogg died at age 91 and was buried in an adjacent plot. The battling brothers rest side by side for eternity, their earthly conflicts finally silent. What are we to make of John Harvey Kellogg and the empire he built? His contributions to American health culture are undeniable. At a time when many still believe disease resulted from divine judgment or night air, Kellogg championed the germ theory and promoted personal hygiene, uncontaminated food, exercise, adequate rest, and emotional well-being as defenses against illness. Many of his natural remedies, hydrotherapy, exercise, proper posture, heat application, and even certain forms of electrical stimulation, continue to be used by physical therapists today. He permanently altered American eating habits. His invention of flaked cereals, however motivated by his peculiar theories, created an industry that transformed breakfast from a heavy, time-consuming meal into something quick and convenient. His meat substitutes made from nuts and legumes provided vegetarians with protein-rich alternatives. As vegetarianism gained traction in the late 20th century, due to health, environmental, and ethical concerns, Kellogg's innovations remained relevant. He was one of the first prominent physicians to recognize obesity as a health threat and to encourage caloric moderation. His emphasis on whole grains and fiber anticipated much of modern nutritional advice. Remove the pseudoscience about auto-intoxication and passion-dampening bland foods, and substantial elements of his dietary philosophy align with current recommendations. The term sanitarium entered American vocabulary and spread worldwide. Adventist institutions adopting that name and Kellogg's health principles developed throughout North America and across the globe. Most eventually evolved into general hospitals owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church, creating a network of more than 170 medical institutions that still operate today. Yet these contributions cannot be separated from the darkness that permeated his work. His theories about personal purity justified treatments that caused genuine suffering. His obsession with controlling every aspect of human physiology, from bowel movements to intimate behavior, reflected a tyrannical impulse dressed up as medical science. His advocacy for eugenics remains his most damning legacy. He provided scientific-sounding justification for racism, ableism, and forced sterilization. He helped create the ideological framework that would inspire horrific policies. The fact that he showed personal kindness to individual African Americans and people with disabilities does not absolve him. It merely highlights the disturbing ease with which someone can be generous in personal interactions while supporting systemic oppression. The Buck v. Bell decision that Kellogg's movement helped bring about has never been overturned. It remains valid legal precedent, a ghostly reminder that the eugenic impulse lurks just beneath the surface of supposedly civilized society. Kellogg's split from the Seventh-day Adventist Church reveals another troubling pattern. Despite his genuine religiosity, he prayed, studied scripture, and maintained Adventist lifestyle practices. He could not submit to institutional authority. His need for absolute control over his domain exceeded his religious obligations. The Church's accusations of pantheism in the living temple may have been theologically questionable, but they recognized a deeper truth. Kellogg had made himself the god of his own system, the ultimate arbiter of human wellness. The serial rivalry with his brother W.K. demonstrates how even family bonds could not survive Kellogg's demands for dominance. He treated W.K. as a servant for decades, then felt betrayed when his brother finally claimed independence and success. The legal warfare that consumed both men's later years brought neither satisfaction nor reconciliation. W.K.'s eventual victory was hollow. He became wealthy but bitter, estranged from his own children, unable to enjoy the empire he had built. John Harvey's defeat was equally barren. He watched his younger brother succeed with a product that represented, in his view, a corruption of everything he had tried to achieve. Both brothers lived to 91. Perhaps the bland diet and intense exercise really did contribute to longevity, but neither found peace. The Hart Dole Inouye Federal Center stands today as a monument to transformation and to the impermanence of human ambition. The building that once echoed with the peculiar sounds of Kellogg's health empire, the chewing songs, the vibrating chairs, the rush of 15-quart enemas, now hums with the mundane business of government bureaucracy. Forms are filed, meetings are held, Employees arrive in the morning and leave in the evening, most unaware that they work in a place where some of the strangest chapters of American health history unfolded. Occasionally, a tour group passes through, listening to guides explain about cornflakes and famous patients. They laugh at the more absurd treatments, the yogurt enemas, the vibrating chairs, the electrical eye treatments. It all seems so distant, so obviously misguided, so easy to dismiss as the folly of a less enlightened age. But perhaps we should be more cautious in our judgment. Kellogg believed passionately that he was improving humanity, that his methods represented scientific progress, that future generations would vindicate his theories. He was utterly sincere in his convictions, yet utterly wrong about much of it. The same intelligence and determination that drove genuine innovations also led him to promote theories that caused immense suffering. Every age produces its prophets of wellness, its gurus promising transformation through adherence to new systems of living. They speak with certainty, citing science, appealing to our deepest desires for health, purity, and control over our mortal bodies. Some offer genuine insights, others peddle pseudoscience wrapped in the language of authority. The difficult task is distinguishing between them, a task made harder by the reality that the two are often mixed within the same person, the same movement, the same building. The Battle Creek Sanitarium rose as a palace of certainty, a temple where Dr. Kellogg and his white cockatoo presided over rituals of purification and perfection. It fell not because its creator lacked vision or energy, but because his certainties were built on foundations that could not bear examination. The Great Depression merely accelerated an inevitable collapse. What remains is stone and memory. The Italian Renaissance facade still stands, impressive in its architecture if stripped of its original purpose. The 15-story towers still pierce the Michigan sky, though they house federal workers rather than health seekers. The farms are gone, the treatment rooms converted, the dining hall where patients once sang the chewing song transformed beyond recognition. And somewhere in Oak Hill Cemetery, beneath a modest stone, lies John Harvey Kellogg, the prophet in white, the emperor of the bowel, the eugenicist, the inventor, the tyrant, the visionary, the quack. History has not yet decided which title deserves precedence. Perhaps it never will. His legacy reminds us that the pursuit of perfection, whether of the body, the race, or the soul, always carries danger. The more certain we become that we have found the path to human betterment, the more likely we are to justify cruelty in its name. The more convinced we are of our own righteousness, the less able we become to see the harm we cause. The Battle Creek Sanitarium is gone, but the impulse that created it, the belief that if we just follow the right rules, adopt the right habits, submit to the right authority, we can transcend our flawed humanity, that impulse remains. It appears in every new diet, fad, every wellness trend, every promise that perfection lies just around the corner, if we will only buy the right product, adopt the right philosophy, trust the right guru. Kellogg's legacy lives on, not just in cereal boxes, but in our perpetual willingness to believe that health and virtue are achievable through strict adherence to someone else's system. The white suit and cockatoo are gone, but the archetype remains. The charismatic figure promising transformation, demanding obedience, absolutely certain of their rightness. The old sanitarium building stands as a warning. Grand visions often become hollow monuments, and today's scientific certainty may become tomorrow's cautionary tale. The pursuit of health is noble. The pursuit of perfection is perilous. And the line between them can vanish like smoke from a fire on a February morning, leaving only ruins and regret.